All right, everybody. Let's go ahead and get this party started. Again, welcome to Covering Disability in International Media, Perspectives from the Journalism Industry. We have started recording, so please turn off your mics if they are not turned off already. And unless you are a guest speaker, you are free to turn your video off as well. Once again, this event is being recorded and will be shared for educational purposes. And this event is hosted by the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University, co-sponsored by the National Center on Disability and Journalism and the Center for Media and Communities. I'm Chelsea Reynolds. I am the director of the Center for Media and Communities here in Los Angeles, California. Welcome to our well-attended event. I see 87 guests in the room at this time. So this is very good news for all of us here as we have this conversation about covering disability in international media. The event is hosted in two parts. So we will start shortly after introductions with a pre-recorded 15-minute video created by journalists across the globe. And they are going to be sharing with us how disability is reported upon in their home countries in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. I will make a note once more that mics should be turned off. And if closed captioning is needed, you can go ahead and enable that on your own Zoom on your laptop or desktop. I'll go ahead and introduce the Center for Media and Communities. This is a new initiative at the Cronkite School that facilitates scholarship and programming just like this about media representation in a changing world. By investigating how media shape and are shaped by human cultures, we provide a platform to challenge stereotypes, engage with underrepresented voices, and identify interventions that advance media equity. We bring together researchers, industry experts, content creators, activists, artists, and community members from various backgrounds to build trust with one another and envision the future for more equitable storytelling. So with that, I will stop my share screen and introduce quickly my research assistants who have helped plan this event. We have Elita. Elita, go ahead and wave. Elita Dilshad Karim is a Cronkite PhD student from Bangladesh, where she worked for 20 years as an arts and entertainment editor at the Daily Star. Karina, go ahead and wave. Karina Luna is a Cronkite PhD student from Mexico, conducting research on media literacy and artificial intelligence. And my third research assistant, last but not least, is Haley Aktsen, a junior digital audiences student at ASU, whose main academic interest is in the intersection of politics, social issues, and digital media. A huge round of applause to my research assistants for putting this event together, and also to NCDJ for partnering with us on this very important initiative. I'll go ahead and let Pauline introduce herself. Again, thank you for being here, and we look really forward to this important topic today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pauline Arriaga. I'm a professor of practice at the Cronkite School and executive director of the National Center on Disability and Journalism. I joined the Cronkite School at ASU in 2019 after spending 27 years as a reporter and a senior writer and the enterprise editor at the Associated Press. I just wanted to fill you in a little bit about the NCDJ, as we call it. The goal of our center is to provide support and guidance for journalists, content creators, communicators, you name it, anyone, to help expand and improve coverage of disability issues and individuals with disabilities in the United States, but all across the globe as well. We have been housed at the Cronkite School since 2008, and we do quite a few things. We offer training and resources that include a pretty well-known style guide that has recommendations about language and disability-related terms. We provide tip sheets with best practices, for example, for interviewing people with disabilities. And we also offer customized workshops for individuals or organizations. We have provided training for media organizations that include the New York Times and Hearst, for other organizations, including Spotify, even for lawyers who are interested in learning how to better interview people and clients with disabilities. And in direct relation to today's conversation, last year we partnered with UNESCO to help develop a comprehensive guide for global media practitioners to help ensure fair and unbiased coverage of disability. And to rethink how content can be made more accessible. One of our panelists, Agam Shah, I'm certain will be sharing some insights about that. We work on that manual. One more quick plug. NCDJ is also home to the only professional and student journalism contests devoted exclusively to disability coverage. And really, it's through this contest and the growing number of entries that we have been seeing from across the world that I've come to see and understand how vital it is that we expand the conversation around disability coverage beyond the United States. I say this every time I do a training, every time I talk to students. People with disabilities are the largest marginalized group in the world. And yet, our ability to cover these stories varies from country to country and place to place, depending on the resources, the legal landscape, the cultural norms, and so much more. So I am thrilled that we're having this panel today and that we are uplifting some of these issues and some of those voices.
Thank you, Pauline. We will go ahead and remind everyone that this panel has two parts. And the first part, which will start in a few minutes, is going to be a pre-recorded video session, which is 15 minutes in length. We have pre-recorded content from journalists across the world who report on disability in order to give them a voice in this conversation, even though we're in very different time zones. So the content that's being shared by the journalists who have pre-recorded their comments is in their own words. It has not been edited, it has not been cleaned up, and we want to give a voice authentically to the reporters who are sharing their experiences with us. Before we jump into the pre-recorded video, I'll ask that questions be added to the chat. So if you have questions about the video itself or anything that's said after, please add those in the chat. And Karina, one of our research assistants at the CMC, will be monitoring those questions and flagging them for me and Pauline. Before we jump into the pre-recorded video, I will also ask our research assistant, Elita, to introduce our live panelists who are here in the room with us. So Elita, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, and good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion. I will now be introducing our Zoom panelists and also explaining the video, which Chelsea has already done. Thank you so much. So we have with us Elira Changa. Hi, Elira. She's an Albanian journalist and a media trainer with 20 years of experience in reporting, media development, and communication for international organizations. She worked for BBC in Albania and helped establish Albania's first fact-checking service, Factoya. Her work focused on strengthening independent media and journalism education in her country, and she's also co-author of the Manual on Crime and Court Reporting and Practical Guidelines on Gender-Based Reporting. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Alira. We have Zainab Haddaji. Hi, Zainab. Thank you so much for being here with us today. She is a Djiboutian journalist and a specialist in social and behavior change communication. She has worked with the WHO, USAID, and Caritas on documenting social vulnerabilities, public health challenges, and community-driven initiatives across the Horn of Africa. She's currently a Humphrey Fellow at Arizona State University's Cronkite School and continues her work as an independent cross-border reporter, focusing on underreported communities in the region. Welcome, Agam Shah. Agam Shah serves on the board of the National Center on Disability and Journalism and teaches at Arizona State University's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism. His work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and ESPN. He co-authored UNESCO's Disability Equality in the Media Representation, Accessibility Management, a Practical Manual. We also have 4 journalists from across the world joining us asynchronously due to time zone differences. We have Johnson Mayamba from Uganda. We have Haya Fatima Iqbal from Pakistan, Kaberi Sultana from Bangladesh, and Susan Mujawa from Uganda. And the pre-recorded video, which we will be playing shortly, is roughly a 15-minute long video. And after the video ends, we will reopen the conversation with our live panelists. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alita, for that introduction. Our journalists who pre-recorded content will introduce themselves in greater depth in the video. So I will go ahead and share my screen. And again, this video lasts about 15 minutes, so I will ask that all of our panelists, even our speakers here in the room with us, turn off their mics while we share this video content. I will go ahead and start playing this, and we will come back for Q&A moderated by Pauline Arriaga in about 15 minutes. Thank you.
Trust you are well where you are. Now I have a question for you. Have you ever imagined at any one time having a person with visual impairment anchoring news that you are set to watch? If you have seen it before, I must say you are lucky. That is not common in this side of the world. My name is Johnson Mayamba. I am a seasoned human rights journalist based in Kampala, Uganda, in East Africa. I currently work as a news producer, stroke, an editor for the Nation Media Group Uganda, a private and most independent media house in East Africa. This is the media house that granted the opportunity to a person with visual impairment to come on screen and be able to anchor news for everyone to watch and be impressed. This is not something that is common. It was the first in Uganda and first in East Africa and second on the African continent. These are some of the strides we've made as a country in ensuring that persons with disabilities are well represented and their voices are heard. Another area that we have made strides include having legal protection in the country for persons with disability, but thirdly is to have affirmative action in place where we ensure that all persons with disabilities are represented at every level of leadership, from the lowest to the most top leader in the country. We have members of parliament, we have councillors, and we have ministers who are persons with disabilities. Why? Because of the affirmative action. But even with these strides that we've made, there are still challenges. Challenges with awareness, challenges with stigmatization, challenges with discrimination. Most people in Uganda still think having a disability is caused by either witchcraft or that your family or you yourself is cursed. Now, those are the things we are battling every day as a media house to ensure that we debunk, but also have persons with disabilities well represented and that their voices are ably heard. If you want to look at that video, just Google in NTV Uganda blind anchor. You'll be able to see that person with disability who was able to anchor news for Uganda and a moment that was created in Uganda's history as the first of its kind. Thank you so much for listening, and I wish you a great deliberation during this class. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I hope all of you are well. My name is Haya Fatma Iqbal, and I'm an independent documentary filmmaker and the co-founder of the Documentary Association of Pakistan, and I'm based in Karachi, Pakistan. I feel like the way disability is represented in the Pakistani media in my home country is that reporters, journalists, and storytellers are often looking for um, narratives of hope and heroism. And instead of portraying or representing um, stories of people with disability as normal stories of normal people, they're usually limited to stories of heroism, of incredible achievement, of resilience, and that I feel like puts this undue pressure on people with disability that they either have to excel in something, and they either have to break all kinds of barriers to be noticed and to be seen as someone extraordinary, or otherwise they don't have a chance is in being represented in any which way, in any kind of media, whether it's audio media, whether it's video media, whether it's print media. I do feel like the one way in which disability representation can be improved in the Pakistani media is by hiring more people with disability. I feel like one of the biggest barriers that exists right now in our media is that a lot of journalists themselves do not know what all does disability entail. I think people still have very stereotypical and old-fashioned definitions of disability in their minds, which means that when they think of a person with disability, they only think of someone on a wheelchair, someone who can't see, someone who can't hear, someone who can't speak. There's absolutely no awareness of non-visible disabilities. There's absolutely no disability about chronic illness or mental illness. Being disability itself. So I feel like in many cases, journalists themselves may be a person with disability, but they don't know that they also fall under the same category, which is why they're always looking for either extraordinary stories um, uh, in the disability realm, or they try to just not focus on the coverage at all. They rather only tell stories of disability when a special day, for example, is supposed to be commemorated. But I think this problem can only be solved if more and more newsrooms, production houses, newspaper offices, um, digital media platforms hire people with disability and hire people with different kinds of disability. When more people with disability tell stories, there is a high chance that more and more stories around disability will be told in a more sensitive and nuanced way. Thank you.
Hi, this is Kabri Sultana, a woman with cerebral palsy disability and a disability right activist from Bangladesh. Currently, I'm working as a trainee sub-editor with Dhaka Tribune and a chairperson of an OPD, Panicles Disabled People's Organization to Development. And previously, I have been working with WFP as UN volunteer with the Gender Protection and Disability Inclusion team. In media representation in Bangladesh, disability is still portrayed within the charity model. This way may increase the views, but it does little improve for the quality life for persons with disability, and does little improvement for the societal sensitization. When covering a disability-related story, journalists are often unsure how to approach or how to address the persons with disability, which creates some embarrassment. When journalists seek information from the government official on disability-related issue, uh, because of the lackings of understanding about the persons with disability, journalists often miss the important questions to ask the government officials. If a journalist themselves is a person with disability, when they are going to collect reports from the field level, they face so much challenges because of infrastructural and transportation inaccessibility. To improve the representation of persons with disability in media sector, it's very important to directly involve the persons with disability in journalism. If they are directly involved, their challenges would be identified, and the organization can improve their policies for persons with disability. All the staff members who are journalists, I think they should have received the disability related orientation. Media outlets should publish weekly or monthly column from expert and some living experience stories from persons with disability. Also, they can regularly publish some updates of our national, international laws and how the government is working for persons with disability.
Hi, my name is Susan Mujawa from Uganda. I'm a sign language interpreter and co-founder of Science TV Uganda, a YouTube-based television that is that produces services for the deaf and hard of hearing community. I also work with the mainstream and development media to promote disability inclusion in storytelling. In Uganda, conversations about disability are gradually changing. For a long time, people with disabilities were either left out or portrayed as charity cases. But today, inclusivity is starting to gain ground. Some media houses like NTV Uganda, where I work, now features persons with disabilities in their political coverage. Since now Uganda, we are in the political season. So since the campaign started, now different media stations are including people with disabilities. For example, those people with persons with disabilities who are candidates and they are contesting for a leadership position. They have been seen and in different reports they have been there and they are actually portrayed as people of high caliber. So to me, that is inclusivity gaining ground. So we can say about 20% we have gained ground in disability reporting, which is really a good point for us who are advocating for inclusive reporting. However, challenges remain that many journalists lack the right language and sensitivity when they are reporting about persons with disabilities. This is often seen, it's not because they have ill intent, no. It's rather lack of training and limited access to accurate information. So disability is still treated as a social issue, not a rights issue in much of our media coverage. So the technical barriers like the absence of sign language interpretation on some TVs, the inaccessible press briefings and limited budgets for inclusive production, all that shows that it's really hard to produce content that is truly representing persons with disabilities, that is content that is for everyone. As Science TV Uganda, our approach is different. We let the persons with disabilities themselves to tell the stories. Our hosts and reporters are deaf, so they are supported by the sign language interpreters. When we cover stories, when we want to interview people, the sign language interpreters are available. So women issues are represented, gender-based issues are represented. So every aspect of a person with disability is represented when we are doing inclusive reporting. Personally, I believe true disability representation in media starts with advocacy. Journalists must learn to see persons with disability as aspects of their own lives, not as subjects of pity. So we need to have continued training, collaboration with disability organizations and policies that can make accessibility in newsroom to be a standard. So if media can also reinforce the inclusion to lead the way towards that inclusive reporting, then I know all this that we are advocating for will be seen someday. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share the Uganda story.
And thank you so much to our audience for listening. We are so grateful to our international reporters for sharing their perspectives in their home countries. And we hope this will contribute to the larger conversation that we have starting now with our live panelists. Pauline, I will let you take it away with the Q&A. And as a reminder to our audience members, mics off and questions go in the chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So first and foremost, please don't feel like you have to all answer every question, but just jump in, unmute, and chime in when you want to. And so we're going to talk probably for about 25 minutes, and then for those on the panel here in the conversation, we're going to open it up to you for questions. So if you do have questions, again, as Chelsea said, start thinking about those. Feel free to add those to the chat. And at some point, we'll also probably allow you to unmute once we're done talking if you do have some questions to add. So I wanted to start with this because one of the panelists we just saw on video mentioned visible and invisible disability, right? And I think that so many people, when they think of disability, they do think of the visible and not the many, many ways in which disability can touch somebody's lives or life. So I wanted to ask you all, what are some of the most important and perhaps untold or unseen stories about disability in your home countries or in countries you've reported from? And in answering this, feel free, if you want to reference a specific story about disability that you may have covered. But what are some of those stories that people aren't aware of and need to be? I'm not going to call on you. Anybody can just jump on in there, or I will call on you.
Can
Agam.
I
Okay,
start?
yes.
Hi, this is Zainab, a journalist and a half fellow. So, first of all, I want to say, like, personally, as a journalist, I live with partial hearing loss, about 45%, so which has shaped how I listen and how I report, and also gave me this ability to report in a fair way about people with disability. I'm gonna share one story about the Horn of Africa. So in this region, people suffer from climate change and conflicts and war. And in this case, disability can also be a result of conflicts and unsafe journey. So it's also a political issue. In this kind of situation, most of the reporting that I have seen from big media outlets, they don't tell story of people got disability because of displacement or because of military conflict or migration problem. So I think in this kind of situation, journalists covering displacement, migration, and people moving or displaced because of climate change should also be aware about people with disability, not only that they have it biologically, but also people who got this after passing through this journey. So I think this is also an invisible public and invisible community with disability resulted from conflicts and displacement. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I can.
I'm glad you unmuted. I was going to go to you next.
I have a story about. So I wrote a story. My name is Agam Shah. I had brain surgery in 2005. I had two brain surgeries. As a result, I have a somewhat of a learning disability, but I also teach at the ASU at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism. I did a story for ESPN about a Paralympic athlete. She has cerebral palsy, and she wanted to compete in the Olympics, and she had a specific time frame because her muscles and her legs weren't moving. And Taekwondo is all about kicking, so she had a very limited time frame in which to compete. She managed to make the Olympics, but then there are certain classifications in Taekwondo in which the Taekwondo organization that handles Olympic participants, they disqualified her for the next Olympics. So she qualified for 2020, but she was not able to qualify for 2024 because they focused on disabilities that were visible. If you don't have a hand, if your leg is affected by a disability, they're the only ones that qualified for the 2024 Olympics. So she was extremely frustrated by the fact that, the disabilities that people recognize, especially in Paralympics, are the visible disabilities, not the invisible disabilities like cerebral palsy, where she can't move her legs. So I was frustrated as much as she was because I understand what it means to have a disability and just how frustrating it can be. So I sympathize with her. And, I feel like there's a lack of understanding of visible and invisible, as one of the videos pointed out. And there needs to be more awareness amongst people. And journalists can enable that by journalists with disabilities actually can understand how to cover disabilities, and there needs to be more inclusivity in the newsroom itself.
So, Agam, I'm afraid I have an ignorant question then. So, has anything changed in terms of entry into the Paralympics and the type of disability?
Not within Taekwondo itself. I'm campaigning along with some other Taekwondo instructors. I was going to go to Salt Lake City to help them, but there are a few activists who are the categories that exist for the types of disabilities. So we're asking them to extend the categories to include invisible disabilities.
So interesting. Alira, what can you tell us about what you've seen in Albania? Are there any particular stories you would want to talk about, or even just some of the issues that have either been well covered, hopefully, or perhaps remain undercovered?
Thank you, Paulina. I was about to jump in because I really wanted to go back 25 years ago when I started journalism back in Albania. But before doing that, physical impairments, physical disabilities are really visible, and we see stories of that into media. What is not visible, like for example, mental health conditions, is something that is totally missing in Albania. And this is what I faced when, as a young reporter, more than 25 years ago, like 1999 is when I started as a young reporter in one of the daily newspapers in Albania. I was sent out there to cover one of these stories, which actually came by one of the organization. World Vision was working at that time, and they wanted to offer us the possibility to meet with families who had children with mental health conditions. So, and I was a young reporter, and when you are a young reporter in a newsroom, they put you into the social issues because you never go wrong with social issues. But actually, you can go wrong with anything. If you are a young reporter and you don't have any kind of editorial guidelines or any ethical code, everything I knew was theoretical. So that's happened to me. Drove 2 hours to go in another city and meet with these families, and I didn't know that I would spend the whole day hearing about their stories in a very different way from mom and dad and people, the whole family around them. When I came back to the office 6 p.m. after spending more than 10 hours with them, I thought it was going to be 2 hour, 3 hour thing. It was not. I didn't know where to start writing about that. I had no training. I was put into reporting social affairs because that's the easiest one in the newsroom. You can do that. But then nobody thinks that these are some of the most delicate issues that you can cover, and everything can go wrong from diagnosis, from the way you behave, from the way you try to interview, from the way you are, in a way, flexible, or you make this a meeting with this family. You put yourself in their shoes and try to understand what is one day of their life, and they want really to tell you about this. They just don't want to see a reporter that comes to you, gets the interview, and bye, I'm done with my job. I'll have my story tomorrow in the newspaper, my name on it, and I'm a kind of hero. I was really looking at the video, and yeah, we look for hero stories, resilience stories, because that is what, at least that was how the audience was prepared by media more than 20 years ago, and maybe still is, to listen to these stories only if we have a hero. For those people who are struggling, there is no really place in the media. And even the editor of my story, of the pages in the newspaper, was something like that can strike the audience tomorrow? Maybe some of these stories cannot strike. It tells you the real story from a daily life. But that's why we need to have that really struggling story, not just heroes. So I was not really prepared for that, but that can be a turning point. You can start reading more about that. You can start talking to medical professionals. You can start talking to your colleagues who covered that issue before, or you can start by researching yourself, dedicating time. The problem is, it was that at that time, and it still is now, is that journalists do not have much time to prepare themselves. Very often they are thrown into these fields without knowing anything, and they have to do this kind of research on their own, which is part of the job, but it's really great to have your newsroom, in a way, put you in there or enable you to understand more before you go and report on these issues. Change perspectives, understand that it's part of the audience, and as part of the audience, it shouldn't be just a striking story, a
Right.
totally different story, but should be a story told to this audience that is following you. In Albania, it's 10% of the population, still a huge number when you think of the audience. But audiences somehow are kind of not really prepared to that. I started working more on that and reading more about that, but something that changed in me was when I started working for the BBC in Albanian, which was a weekly program. And for that weekly program, I was preparing audio stories, so packages, as they used to call at that time. And I was going not only to interview for a newspaper, for a print newspaper, but now recording their voices, having everything like in audio. BBC at that time, maybe still now, for sure, still now, had the editorial guidelines, a huge book that you could really not hold it with you. Now everything is online. Helped me a lot into understanding what is that fine line between what to report and what you cannot report, where you can focus, how can you behave, how can you make your interviews comfortable for the people that you are meeting in these stories. Helped a lot, and I wish later on I engaged into preparing these editorial guidelines for my own newspaper and others because I went into media development. But I think that was a moment in which I really felt, well, something like that you need to know before going there and reporting.
Yeah, absolutely. And you did say it. I mean, there are resources. And again, we at NCDJ, that's what we do. We train newsrooms about proper language, right? How to appropriately interview somebody with a disability, the types of stories to avoid and the tropes to avoid. So there are resources out there, but actually you just and 1 in 6 of us globally, 1 in 6 of us have a disability of some kind again. So this is all of us, or it's somebody that we know or a family member. And there are so many reasons why we need to be improving this coverage. So, because of your answer, I want to jump to something else. So, for all of you, because let's see if we are making progress. Have newsrooms that you have worked in abroad, Alira, you mentioned BBC, have they had any specific guidelines or standards regarding coverage of disability? And if so, can you kind of touch on some of those? And Agam, feel free to jump in as well, because of course I know you did so much research with the UNESCO manual that you may very well be able to chime in about some of the various policies and newsrooms. And Zeneb, please as well. Who wants to go first?
I can go. So there has been progress. So the UNESCO manual, I'll put a little plug in here for the UNESCO manual. The UNESCO manual was published in 2024 by UNESCO, and it's basically it's called I keep forgetting the name, but that's part of my disability. It's called the
I will
UNESCO
put it in the chat.
Yeah. So I started doing some research in 2023. Basically, the idea was it was supposed to be a 16-page manual as a practical sort of a manual on how to cover disabilities for journalists, like a practical manual. It turned into a 102-page document that covers print, radio, and best practices in pretty much all media forms of media. So I started working with folks and I started talking to them in 2023 about how is disability coverage in your community or your country? And a tremendous amount of progress has been made. Susan Mujawa, who spoke in one of the videos, I started speaking to her in 2023 about what the conditions were. And she talked about the fact that, in prime time, the persons with disabilities in media, for example, there was no broadcast tools that were available. So people with disabilities couldn't tune in to the news between 9 and 11 or something like that. But she's talked about progress ever since. And so she had to start Science TV to address that requirement. So people with disabilities in Uganda could actually tune into the news. But 2 years down the line, a lot of progress has been made. And it was a requirement from policies established by the government of Uganda to make, media accessible, basically a fundamental right in the country. So clearly her activism has taken shape and things have changed in Uganda. It was actually great to hear about it in her video. There are certain, it's gotten better myself. When I was recruited to the Wall Street Journal, as a disabled journalist, I didn't have to reveal the fact that I had a disability, which is, my disability, which was learning and writing and, memory issues. I did not have to reveal it when, I joined the Wall Street Journal in 2019. But I opted to talk about it as I wanted to make sure my editors knew that when I was filing a story that they had given extra eye to stories that they were looking at. And if they had any ideas on how I can be a better journalist and how I could, work around, my disabilities to be a better journalist. So they took that in mind, and I had the mentorship I was looking for. They would take my stories and talk about the stories and, where the weaknesses are in the stories and what I could do to better, interview or, take notes or transcribe and what to look for in stories. And you have to be really good if you're at the Wall Street Journal. No errors. There's no space for any kind of mistake. So I had the mentorship I needed. And there are other, there's at Dow Jones, they offer accessibility tools for applicants looking for jobs. Like they help you with your resume. They provide accommodation for journalists with disabilities, especially when interviewing. These small changes are making a big difference, especially in the US. The New York Times has a fellowship disability, a fellowship where they recruit journalists or fellows to cover journalism. And, there are changes from 2023 that are a lot more visible now. And BBC has made a lot of progress as well. But of course, policies change every day. So we have to wait and watch on how these things will progress over the next couple of years. Things go up and down. It's just a matter of time to see how things go.
And for our other panelists, have you worked in newsrooms where there were actual policies around or guidelines or guidance around the coverage of disability or individuals with disabilities? Or Alira, kind of like when you were starting out, were you
Yeah,
just sort of left to try to figure it out on your own?
I was left to figuring it out on my own. I mean, when I worked in Central Asia, which was back in 2000, 2001, I ended up covering the Afghan war. Naturally, there's no space for journalists with disabilities when you're going to cover a war. So it depends on the scenario, and it's a pretty it's a pretty the journalism over there is not as developed as you'd want it to be. So you're literally going in and just adapting yourself to different journalism practices around there. When I was in the UK and I interned over there, I did my master's at University of Wales in Cardiff. There were policies in place for persons with disabilities. That was way back in 1997. Not in the US until I got to Dow Jones. I was working for a smaller publication, but you kind of adapt. But after the brain surgery in 2005, I got the help that I needed because I couldn't speak, I couldn't write properly, and they kind of mentored me back into journalism. So it's really the people around me that have helped me throughout my career.
If I can jump into here, I mentioned there was no editorial guidelines or editorial principles in Albanian media at that time, and I'm talking about 1999, when all wars in the Balkans happened and a lot of these stories came up. But later on, so at that moment we had only the ethical code, which covers a little bit reporting on disabilities, but just on one sentence. So respect and dignity. And I think it says it all, but you need to go further. And these editorial guidelines, as we work later on, 10 years after that, especially with the public service media, the public broadcaster in Albania, I worked intensively to produce the guidelines for them, having in mind this, what I was lacking when I was a journalist myself. And again, to put you in a context, pluralistic media in Albania started in the 90s after the fall of communism. So it was really an unexplored environment and situation. So when we started working on that, we really had in mind what do journalists need to know? Not only guidelines, editorial judgment. What would you do differently? How would you cover this story differently? Not only respect and dignity and accuracy. More than that, resources. Where can you find resources? Which Aga mentioned, and I'm so happy to see this new resource now for journalists, which is really helpful. But really, you want to know where can you find experts to talk about this specific issue, medical professionals who can be your sources. You want to find also associations which represent people with disabilities. So to hear their story and to hear their approach on so it's not only giving you a guidance how to report the story, which is really important, but also giving you some resources where you can find more information about that, or you can find more people to talk about that and try to put yourself on their shoes. So really it started developing, and as I said myself, I was engaged into writing these professional guidelines then for journalists. I'm happy to have them. It's never enough. It's never enough. And those two words that I remember very well, respect and dignity from the Code of Ethics back in Albania of those days, really guided me in a way, but they were not enough for a journalist covering social issues. So we really need to look more into that. Use of language and tone, accuracy, privacy, consent, all these issues that come up when you are, that are questions into your mind if you are a young reporter, have to be covered by the guidelines. By the way, I have not seen the new resource of UNESCO, but I'm so happy to go into that, and I'm happy that journalists now have this kind of resource. So really great work on that.
And we have shared several links in the chat related to that. Zineb, please chime in.
Thank you for Agam and Elira for sharing the resources and perspective. I want to share my personal experience as a freelancer journalist working in a country without free media outlet. It's zero independent media outlet. There is only the government media outlet. So I'm trying to report for foreign media outlet and for as a journalist also with a partial hearing disability. I'm sensitive to this topic, but on the other hand, also freelancer journalists, they don't have this kind of opportunity to learn about guidelines and ethics, how to report about people with disability, because we are struggling to report. We are doing our best to keep this to do this job to inform people. So I'm all the time concerned about this. How can independent journalists working under censorship, dictatorship, have access to this kind of resource and be aware about it? Because working alone or going solo as a journalist also keeps you away from this training or this resources that maybe senior editor and senior journalist can help to do if you are in a proper media outlet. But when you are a freelancer and you are working in a very hard context, it's difficult to be aware about it myself, because I'm suffering from this. I'm aware, but other journalists or reporter they don't have the chance to learn how to report on people with disabilities. So just this is my thoughts about this.
Thank you so much. I know we are getting some questions in the chat. I was going to ask one more question that actually is a follow-up, as an up to what you were just talking about. I mean, freelance journalism, independent journalists trying to work under dictatorships, or in other difficult conditions. Can you three talk a little bit about some of the barriers that may exist, maybe specifically in international newsrooms, um, related to structural or legal barriers that exist for journalists who want to tell these stories? I mean, here in the United States, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, that helps in some ways, but to shine a light on stories of people with disabilities. But what other barriers might international journalists be facing?
I can jump on it because, for example, in my country, if you are covering a story about people, a person with disability, the regime and the authority will accuse you not being patriot, and you are showing our dark side to the world. And it's like it's even they don't provide infrastructure and facility for these people, but in addition, they censor the story to go outside because they think you are showing poverty or you are showing the country is problem. So it's different layer of oppression. So the journalist itself is oppressed by the government because it's trying to tell the story, and the person or the group or the community with disability, their right to tell the story is stolen because of censorship. So this is one of the challenges that I'm personally facing.
And if I can add something on that, is that in international media, or maybe better talk about that part of the world I'm from, resources in newsrooms are very limited. They have been always limited. It's even more now. Many newspapers closed, TV outlets really shrinked in their ranks, and online media has really varied. And sometimes it's only one or two persons. So they have limited resources into dealing with everything, and no dedicated journalists focusing on that. The other thing is that the newsrooms are more focused in politics and economics, because this sells, because this is important, because this is what people want to know. And because the other part, social issues are important, but if it's only for 16% or 20% of a population, then are we really serving the audience? This is the thinking of the editors of the newsrooms. So that makes it even more difficult to cover these stories. The other thing is, at least in Albania and in the Balkans, I do not see journalists, I have not seen journalists with disabilities reporting on that. And if you don't have a journalist with disabilities, appearing, telling you the story, that part of the population will not feel represented. We have to start with that. All those journalists who have disabilities are kind of left aside because, again, audiences are prepared to talk about majority issues, not about minority issues. And minorities in every meaning, not just in ethical meaning. So that is something that can be done differently. And the other thing is having these limited resources. Newsrooms do not think that they should invest in new staff or young reporters that need training. I remember when I was a journalist myself, even to go to a training that might have been offered by the Albanian Media Institute or, I don't know, Croatian Media Institute in the Balkan. Oh no, you can't take time to do that. We have to cover the stories. You have 4 pages in the newspaper. So it's really that kind of thinking that, well, deal with that on your own because we cannot invest so much on you. Instead, we need that kind of training. We need that kind of guidance. We need those kind of resources to improve, make journalism more qualitative and more inclusive. Like inclusive, it's not just an abstract concept. You show it by representing people with disabilities in your media as well. Because it's the thinking, editorial judgment can be totally different on a story if you have a reporter with disabilities reporting on the story.
Or some kind of training,
Yes.
Agam?
So when we started writing the UNESCO manual, created the framework, I think one thing that UNESCO wanted is to change the mindset completely. Just media can change the way people think. So the media can make persons with disabilities equal participants. So we have to cover them better. And to normalize the fact that when we see a person on a wheelchair in a newscast, we gasp, like, how is this possible? We have to normalize that. That's what UNESCO believes in, that, we need to make persons with disabilities part of our daily lives and, equal participants. So the problem that I found is that each and every country has a very different view on persons with disabilities that they have to tackle, that journalists have to have either a bigger challenge or a smaller challenge, or that the policies are not in place, so their work becomes a lot more. They have to be more activists and help persons with disabilities so that they get access to news. And there are countries that have the resources available where the news is readily available in different forms. And some countries just don't have the mediums in which persons with disabilities, like a woman in a village, as an example, with a disability, who's been marginalized. For them, access is just really difficult. So some countries have that in place, some countries don't. One example is COVID-19. During the Wall Street, when we were looking, I was at the Wall Street Journal when the COVID-19 pandemic broke out. The first thing we thought about the news and how to deliver the news to the people who wanted it the most, and that included persons with disabilities. So we put the resources in place to make sure the persons with disabilities actually got the news first, because not first, but they got access to the news because we knew that there would be a challenge for them to read the newspaper or get access to the news. So we included different delivery mechanisms. We put the tools in place so that persons with disabilities can read this news. It was very different in India at the time because the resources were not in place, and just they don't think about persons with disabilities when covering the news. That's not the first audience they have in mind. And political barriers, as was pointed out by Ilira, and it's just really different throughout different countries. So and it starts with the newsroom. It starts with the journalists to change the mindset of the people in different societies.
Thanks, Agam. I do want, can you just very, very briefly, and we are going to open this up to questions, and we have a question somewhat related to this. Can you very briefly talk more specifically about some of the ways in which the journal ensured that the news was getting delivered to people with disabilities. And then again, if you have a question, please feel free to go ahead and put it in the chat. After Agam answers that, I'm going to turn it over to Chelsea, and she's going to go to some of these questions. You may also raise a virtual hand, or if you want to turn your camera on, raise a real hand, and we'll call on you. But if you have questions, either option. And so, Agam, just briefly on that.
Yeah, so the first thing we put is, short news feeds, simply written in simple language. We put, we had these different resources in place. We had HTML5 as an example, which enabled new ways of news reading. We made sure we were compatible with different accessibility tools on the web. There's, I think, WAG, W-A-G, which provides the sort of best practices on how you can publish on the web. So news is accessible to different, bigger fonts. There's flexibility in which you can have smaller fonts or bigger fonts. So we had the ability to extend the size of the fonts for persons with disabilities. At the time, we did not have the ability to automatically narrate the stories, but now the journal has that in place where you can just click a button and there's an audio version of a story that's available. So that was being thought of at that time. Various improvements. We didn't have the AI tools, but now we do.
Yeah.
Not at the journal anymore, but those were some of the examples.
Perfect. Perfect. Chelsea, I'm going to toss to you for some of the questions in the chat. And again, if anyone wants to raise a virtual hand or add a question to the chat, please feel free.
Thank you so much to our panelists for your insights so far. This has just been extraordinarily illuminating. Once again, if anybody in the audience wants to add questions, you heard Pauline, but add them to the chat and we will monitor them. Otherwise, you can virtually raise your hand by clicking the heart symbol at the bottom of your Zoom panel, and there's a little arrow that will allow you to choose a hand motion. So we have 3 excellent questions that have already been proposed, and I'll start there. Clover Schwalm asks the panelists to consider the context of live news or live media. How do outlets work to make tools like teleprompters accessible for live anchors? Otherwise, what alternatives are there for anchors to use? Anybody can jump in here. I'll put it in the chat also so you can read it. Pauline, if you have any thoughts on this, or Agam, I see you unmuting, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I'm not in broadcast, unfortunately, so there's no way I can, answer the question, 100%. But in the UNESCO manual, as an example, there are examples of screen readers when they're reading news that they have live access and changes and all that. Screen readers is one technology. Then they have audio feeds or sort of live audio feeds that have disability tools. So when they get the live audio feed, they're able to sort of narrate based on, the tools that they actually have. Also, access to the building, that's another one that comes up that, if you're going to a studio, or you just have to make sure you have, you're able to enter the building. So you need to have, because you can't go up steps, of course, if you're on a wheelchair. Sometimes, so the most, I think there's a French broadcaster who's on a wheelchair that appears, who's a newsreader. So, things are changing pretty much really quickly.
I think that's a really interesting question because I think I actually misunderstood the question initially, and I thought we were talking about viewers, and I think we're talking about for an anchor themselves, right? If the anchor has a disability. I mean, I think the larger issue here, and several of our panelists have touched on this, is we still don't have enough journalists being hired who have disabilities. It's such a small world out there. So I would imagine that there are plenty of things that are available that could be used for an anchor with a disability. I think the bigger issue is there are just still so few journalists globally with disabilities who are being hired. Zineb.
I can share my experience about this, I produced a small documentary about a Djiboutian startup who creates smart glasses for blind people to read. So it gives accessibility to these people because these glasses can read papers because the braille tools are like big and heavy and doesn't make for example, issues or a newsreader able to do their job. So this kind of tools, which use AI also, make the life easier because they just need to wear the glass and the text will load on their ears. It's very practical, and it's really really smart. But on the other hand, this kind of tools need resources and investment to be developed, and also if we include people with disability themselves in the process of developing this tool, it will be more efficient in the future. But also we need resources. We need to invest in this kind of tool to make these people doing their job in a proper way, and they don't feel like they are less qualified than people with that they don't have disability.
I have something to add to this. If you're a journalist and you're looking to deliver news, TikTok and other social media outlets are not friendly to deliver news for persons with disabilities. It's pretty well known. The transcription, they have no tools for persons with disabilities. So if you wanna write for an audience, persons with disabilities, it's recommended not to use social media tools. I'm sure they're looking to get better at this, but for now, it's not considered a valid tool in terms of news delivery.
That's fascinating, Agam. I did not know that. I'm going to add a question here from Harmony Piper. How should us journalists with disabilities ensure that we are accommodated in our field?
So first off, first thing I'll say is that you don't have to reveal your disability if you're hired. So that is up to you. I'd say don't force yourself to do it. But when you're interviewing, just kind of make sure they have screen readers, or if you're blind, make sure they have the tools and so on and so forth. So it's important for you to do the job. And most likely newsrooms in the US today do not have those tools because, as was pointed out by Zineb, the investment isn't there. So it's worth asking during the interview process if they have the tools for persons with disabilities. It's more of a latch on at this particular point, where once you join, then you can ask and then they'll give you the resources. But in the process, you're risking revealing your disability. So at this particular point, it's just a really that's a tough question because they judge you based on your disabilities, and you could be a liability in some sense. But newsrooms are changing, and there's more awareness about persons with disabilities. So if you feel like you absolutely need to reveal your disability, then go ahead and do it. But there's a risk factor to it. I'm being absolutely practical. And in most newsrooms now, they will help you get the tools you're looking for. But it depends on the career choice you make. I had to reveal it because I had a learning disability and brain surgery and all of that stuff, and I was looking to learn. So it really depends on you. I don't know if that helped, but.
And I wanted to jump in with regard to tools for journalists with disabilities and people with disabilities, so the audience. I will bring again the Albanian example, which I know best. We have a heavily regulated media environment, and in the broadcasting code, accessibility, so having access to information, is plays there, is there. So you could not have the license as a TV, as a national TV, if you are not ensuring that. Now, this is great on the paper. It doesn't mean that it's really great also in implementation. Most of our problems come from these discrepancies between good laws and not really great implementation in practice. But what I will say is that with the technological advancements now, so many things are easier to be done than I remember in Albania we had the sign language included in the main TV editions of 8 p.m., but not on all media. Even though it's on paper, it's a part of the broadcasting code, which derives from the media law. So it's not only a matter of having all these tools, but having the will to put these tools in place. And as Aga mentioned, and I thank you for that, changing mentality is the most difficult thing. So it's up to media organizations, media outlets themselves to ensure to change the mind now and to ensure that they have all the tools in place for audiences and journalists with disabilities. It shouldn't be just a matter of regulation or a media law put out there and left at that.
So true, so true. I see a question in the chat from our research assistant, Haley. Haley, would you like to orate your question? Go ahead and unmute yourself.
I asked, so Kaberi Sultana mentioned in her pre-recorded statement that disabled journalists face infrastructural and transportation barriers when doing field work. So I was wondering what actions still need to be taken in your respective fields to help with that.
So I can start. So could you repeat the question, please, if you don't mind?
Yeah. Kaberi Sultana, she mentioned in her pre-recorded statement that disabled journalists, when they're doing field work, like physical field work, that they face barriers with transportation and infrastructure. And so I was just wondering, like, what, I know it's going to be different in different countries and how accommodating they are, but like, what have you guys seen what actions still need to be taken there?
You know, one of the most common stories about persons with disabilities is lack of transportation. Like you'll see, you know, they're not accountable. Airlines and public transport, even for persons with disabilities, and that's the same challenge that faces persons with disabilities. So it's gotten better over time as there's more accommodations for persons with disabilities, but the fundamental challenges that face the regular public is also faced by journalists. Thing is, journalists have to go to remote places and so on. So there are certain accommodations that in some, especially in the US newspapers, they have special budgets for persons with disabilities to travel. They'll make exceptions in some cases where you're able to use an Uber that is accommodating for persons with disabilities and so on. Something as simple as a wheelchair, it adds an entirely new, it makes persons with disabilities mobile. So giving a wheelchair or having a wheelchair accommodating a person to enter the building, that adds as transport. It adds the ability for people to move. So it varies depending on the disability. So for me, I had limitations on travel, long travel, because after brain surgery, they accommodated me in like shorter flights from one place to another. So it's the same thing that people face, but there are budgets that are available in certain newspapers for people to travel in Ubers or not much beyond that. But there are some places where you can't travel. If you're on a wheelchair, as an example, traveling to a war zone is really not much of an option. You have to be practical about what you're able to do.
I can also add really resources are very important for journalists with disability. For example, actually I'm wearing this hearing aid, if you can see it. So this is small things like it's the weight like a bean. It costs us €3,000. so it's not something accessible to everybody. So the infrastructure, the resources, and technology is a good solution to make journalists with disability do their job. But again, I'm gonna repeat, it's also a problem of resources. How many people, talented and smart with disability, are not able to work and to enter the media outlet because they don't have the money to pay this kind of devices. Also, not all the newsrooms all have technology for louding. For example, I'm speaking about deaf people or partial hearing disability like me. You don't have like louding material in everywhere. You don't have like caption on all the TV program. For example, in Europe, they do have caption services on the TV with cable. They do have this option to with people with disability to be able to read for deaf people. But what about blind people and other people with disability? It's really hard to live with it.
Thank you so much. We have about 10, 15 minutes before we need to wrap up this event. It has been so nice to see the enthusiasm for this important discussion. So thank you again to our audience for all these questions. I have a question here from a private message that is relevant to all of you, but particularly to the context in Djibouti. So, in a country where the government controls what gets published, why might it be harder for people with disabilities to get hired? Do you think the government or particular employers might limit or overlook people with disabilities who want reporting jobs?
It's a good question. Yes, because in Djibouti everything is getting political. So they think maybe hiring people with disability, especially journalists, maybe they speak out about this problem of disability, and by the end they will show like how the government is not doing its job because we signed all these international accords about inclusivity, human rights, blah blah blah, all this stuff. Everything is beautiful on the paper, but when it comes to practice, it's not here. So it's about not only about the government restriction, but also because we don't have any media, so no media gonna hire even people with journalists without disability. So it's really a very strange situation. So in other businesses outside media, for example, company and others, it's very hard to hire people with disability because they don't provide access to the building, for example, and a lot of people with disability they don't have wheelchair to move or they don't have hearing aid. So it's a national context and it's very complex. It's economic, political, and social also issues because and the society also is not so kind to these people because they're not aware about what means disability for these people. So it needs a lot of advocacy, not only for journalists with disability, but also for people with disability in for the society and for the government.
I have something to add on this. I think, when I was sort of doing some research for the UNESCO manual, what I found, there's a paper or two that talked about when you're trying to build talent for journalism, especially people with disabilities, a lot of them basically drop the idea of being a journalist at the education level because they see the challenges that they face in the classroom. As a result, most of the journalism students actually just drop out and they move to PR or marketing or other fields. So the fundamental
I think we may have
where,
lost.
in colleges, for example, it may be people may face struggles just to get to the classroom. So it's Can you see me? I'm sorry. Yeah, so the fundamental issue, as a result, the talent pool of journalists actually drops at the college level, which then people who make it out of there, and if they manage to get employed, it becomes a challenge even at the interview level because the resources are not in place. A lot of stuff has to be done, like a lot of outreach has to be done to encourage uh, persons with disabilities to actually apply for the job. And that's not even in place. And the companies, they don't have full accountability or mechanisms to ensure persons with disabilities have equal rights in organizations, especially journalists.
Thank you so much. I've got, I think, maybe two more questions that we can get through in our last couple minutes here. Another private message question. What are best practices for interviewing sources with disabilities, particularly when access to technologies differ between various countries and regions that we work in? I'll put it in the chat again. What are the best practices for interviewing sources with disabilities? Alira, we haven't heard from you for a minute. Any thoughts on this?
So really, what should be actually in the manuals, but what can be really good or best practices into that? It's think about creating all the possibilities for people with disabilities to be comfortable in your interview. Allow them to bring companions with them. Some of them will need that. Request also funding. I know for newsrooms is a headache, funding for this, funding for that, but this is crucial to ensure this kind of access into information so they can tell their story. And not just one of the journalists mentioned during the video that you showed, most of the people with disabilities are are at the center of the charity news, which shouldn't be. So we have to make sure to give them full access and tell their story as it is. Then offer clear explanations of any kind of request they might have, what makes them really feel comfortable. And always, as I mentioned, make sure that they can reach the location, can enter into the location. So if there is no elevator, for example, in some of the countries, we're talking about totally different countries from the United States, they can't even reach your newsroom and you have to do the interview elsewhere, for example. So always think about consent. When you are talking also to children, think about consent that should be given by guardians or parents, and always keep those in mind. But Chelsea, I wanted to touch upon something else. What can journalists do better in that regard is that people with disabilities or disabilities are most of the time subject of the stories. We see them less as sources of stories or experts. That is what I was talking about, what I was thinking when I was saying that, well, resources that we need. We need experts because they know better. So we have to have their view, their opinion, their approach to that. Not just subject of a story, which you can kind of cook in your own ways, but have them as experts, reputable experts. Because when you are talking about a policy, for example, you really need to take them not as just subject of this story, but as a person who will be impacted by that policy. And I think that we are not seeing that enough. And yes, that's true. The world is changing. There are now much more resources than it used to be before, but we still need to make sure that their voice as an expert, as part of the audience impacted by this change or by this phenomena has to be included as such, not as just the main character of your own story.
I wanted to chime in really quickly on some interviewing tips. First and foremost, make sure you're talking to people who actually have the disability and not just their parent or their caregiver. I think far too often we assume that people with disabilities can't speak for themselves, particularly intellectual or developmental disabilities. And of course they can. Even if they're nonverbal, there is a way to communicate. So as a journalist, it just takes a little bit of extra time and effort to ensure that we're doing our jobs in the best way that we can. And then another important one, please always ask the source, the character, the person you're interviewing, how they want to be identified when it comes to their disability. Um, we don't have time today to go into the difference between person first language and identity first language. Person first, a boy with autism, identity first, an autistic man. People within different disability communities feel differently about how they want to be referred to. So just ask. I think sometimes we, as journalists, particularly younger journalists, perhaps, are a little bit afraid and shy about just asking the question. It's okay to not know everything, and it's far better to just ask the question.
Thank you, Pauline. I am looking at our clock and we have just 4 minutes until we need to wrap. So I will leave us with one final question from the chat, which I think is excellent, something we all need to be thinking about. We have understood in this room why we have so little experience as journalists working with disabled voices and sources, but what needs to change to make these experiences more visible in our industry? All of our panelists, do you want to leave us with maybe a sentence or two about a crucial change that we need to make these experiences more visible?
Yeah, I think this has been talked about a little bit. Let the person with a disability tell their own story. Is absolutely important. A couple things you don't want to do is, there are a couple of words that you don't want to use. For example, suffers from a specific disability. That's a negative connotation that, a person actually suffers. And also, if you're I think the important part is, don't stereotype persons with disabilities. Use positive language. It's really important to make them equal participants. So don't use, just let them tell their story. Don't let anybody else tell their story for them. Because we're assuming that when we're just talking about them, we're showing the disability that they actually have. So, those are some examples.
Thank you. Zineb?
We talked about this story of hero all the time, like it's one of the mainstream story about people with disability. They are hero, they are doing extraordinary stuff, and I think this kind of story doesn't help the big audience to empathize with people with disabilities. So maybe we need to go back to the journalism principles and to cover in a fair way the story of people with disability and say also really in how what is not going on with their daily life, and maybe this is the right way to push government and authority to be aware about it, and maybe that can push authority to change things for them and to give them more access to knowledge or to information, and to really have the right to access information and have the right to be employed in different jobs. So not pity, not charity, but just tell the truth.
Just tell the truth. I love that advice. Elira, any last 30 seconds?
I want to end by saying that all changes in society come from within the community, and as in this case, it's such a great example to say that it should come from within the community itself. Nothing can regulate from outside, like different ways of regulation cannot work. The best is to be organized from inside. And I see one of the comments from one of the questions and then comments from Pauline is that associations of journalists or being organized within the community will drive those research and will bring more data into that. That's very true. We don't have enough data on that, and not having enough data makes you feel invisible, which shouldn't be. So the change should start really from there, start with the organization from within, and themselves, journalists ourselves, we should ask for more research on that, more best practices to be shared, more kind of discussions like these, that what has worked in one country can be implemented, maybe things cannot be, but some of the best practices can really be implemented in other countries. So yeah, I really believe that it should start from within the community of journalists, them asking first.
I have to chime in on that as well. It's a personal decision, and yes, it could somehow backfire and sometimes backfire, but I think we have to start coming out of the shadows a little bit. With COVID-19, with aging, with whatever it may be, there are so many people with a disability of some sort, so many journalists with a disability of some sort, but we have long been afraid to speak up and speak out and let people know. I'm starting to see that changing, and I hope it continues to change because if everybody stays hidden, then people have no idea how many of us there are out there. So at some point, we got to speak up and speak out. Now, Chelsea, I will let you have the final word. But what I will say, everyone, is ncdj.org. We are working on a new website, so forgive it for now. But we have a style guide, we have resources. And again, if you need training, individual training, newsroom training, you may always email me. There's an email on that website. That's what we do. We talk about all of these things, how to interview people, what's the best way to use language. So there are some resources out there. Chelsea?
Excellent. Thank you all again for joining us this afternoon, and we appreciate the panelists' insights. We appreciate the audience's time. Again, we are representatives of the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University. I will be sending out the Zoom recording so you can refer back to it once that's uploaded to our cloud. So thank you. I hope you have a wonderful week. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks to our audience. You are so, so, so valuable. And again, thank you for being here. Okay, take care. We'll be ending the event now. Send us emails if you have additional questions. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.